Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, here to serve all things clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things Bravo. And today is a very special episode. It's my first guest, in fact, on your Bish Therapist podcast, and I couldn't be more delighted to have the talented, amazing Ryan Bailey from So Bad It's Good with Ryan Bailey podcast, Jeff Lewis Live Extended, and so much more. Ryan, welcome to the show.
I am honored to be here. I mean, listen, you're starting off in the bottom of the basement right now with your first guest, and then you can only go upwards from here. You can only go up from here. No, listen, I talked to you in December on my podcast, and it really was one of the best. Like, I needed that conversation, and you made it so easy, and it was so delightful. And I was like, God, I wish I could have you on every week. So I'm so happy to continue that conversation here.
Thank you, Ryan. And I loved it too. And apparently, people, we have a lot of cross section of folks who enjoy us both. And I kept getting messages about people shipping us, and I didn't know what that meant. Do you know what that means? People like loved us.
I think it
like,
just means they really like us as a podcasting duo. I mean, that it is funny what the kids say, and then you spill over into Bravo shows like Sutton last week of like, that's sus. That's sus. And it's like, just say sus, suspicious. Don't say sus like the kids say.
You're right. I mean, as we get to a certain age, when we use some of that lingo, it just makes us look like a geriatric. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
it's already weird that I'm spending my life talking about Bravo. So then if I threw like kids verbiage on top of it, I don't even know if I could face myself in the mirror.
Well, truly, Ryan, I'm delighted, honestly, for you to be my first guest, because I appreciated being on your podcast so much. And, I do want to talk about you for a second, because there is a lot going on in the Bravo world today. The day that this is not going to come out until Tuesday, but the day that we're recording, there's a lot of breaking news that's happening today and a lot of things. But before we get into that, I just want, at the top of the show, I want you to kind of talk a little bit about what are some things that you're doing now. I'd love for you to promote and plug. I feel like for me, this is my first experience with a guest. And so what I love to do is do that at the beginning, because I feel like at the end, people are pretty checked out and they're like, bye. So share with everybody the amazing things that you're doing, please.
Well, listen, I usually come on show, like I come here for like the conversation. Like, if you guys want to listen or follow or whatever, that's amazing. But like, the joy in this for me is just being able to have these conversations. But yeah, I do that podcast, So Bad It's Good with Ryan Bailey. We just switched over to the Betches Network a couple months ago, so I'm wanting to do really good for them. But we do 4 or 5 episodes a week, and it goes from Bravo shows to, Love is Blind to pop culture news. It really is a wide swath. We have directors from like Netflix documentaries. It's because Bravo fans aren't just Bravo fans. We kind of consume it all. And I think there is so much to consume right now. So it really is a show about leaning into these things that we're supposedly supposed to be ashamed of, but they are very valid in talking about it. And that's why I really like what you do, is that you add this extra layer of respectability to it, where we can put a certain language and show, okay, these are the human behavior patterns that we're seeing. What can we derive from this? And I will say my show is more of, I try to be, not try, I mean, I just like to look at things through a humorous slant. So it's a little bit more of that, but yeah, that. And then the Instagram is So Bad It's Good with Ryan Bailey. We have a Patreon that's, man, at this point, there's like 400 episodes that nobody's heard on the main feed. It's why, but because, by the way, I give so much content away for free. Nobody really needs the Patreon, but it's fun. I really love it. A good great gang of people over there. And then recently, in the last couple of months, I've been over at Sirius for Jeff Lewis, his show, and the extended show, which is like the after show. And I've been hosting that with a bunch of people. And that's been really delightful, because I grew up loving talk radio. Like that whole thing, I just pinch myself, because it's one of those things that I really enjoy. And the whole thing is, I did not think I would be doing this as a career at any point. So this is all just kind of gold. I mean, there's a lot of like, you have to suffer a lot of BS through it as well. Like I know you probably get that as well. So, but overall, it has just been overwhelmingly positive. But it's weird because there's no roadmap at this point. And it's just very interesting to see where could we possibly go from here. And can we do it in a silly yet positive way? And I think it's interesting because my Instagram account is it'll sometimes have sharp barbs at people because that's how I'll immediately think. And I'll make a really silly meme that can be very pointed. But on the show, I think we actually handle things fairly respectable. So it's kind of trying to bridge those people of like, hey, you think it's this one thing over here on the Instagram, but maybe listen to the show. But we have Bravo celebrities. We had Danielle from Summer House on this week. I don't know. Anyways, enough about me. Enough about me. Let's get into this.
No, right. The reason I wanted to ask about you first is because, like you said, there's no roadmap for this. You're my first guest, and who knows where the hell this is going for me. But one thing that's important to me is that to maybe have people hear about Ryan behind the pod, because I think that for me, it's all about, personal stories and like origin stories. And, you have a story just like I do. And I think that my audience really loves when people share, their origin story and things like that. So I just, wanted to give the opportunity for you to talk a little bit about that. But your content, I mean, you are a hustler. Like I don't even know how you have like the time space continuum. Do you mold that? How do you even work with that? I feel like you're so on point with getting stuff out. It's
Well, I mean,
wild.
the interesting thing was that I was always following like pop culture since I was a little kid, so that is a part of my
Mm.
daily existence and always has been. Even if I didn't do this show, I would be scouring the internet, not talking about Reddit. I would be scouring like blogs and like actual information and articles and books and, anything with movies or TV or music. I grew up in Kansas, and that was always just the dream. Not the dream to even be here, but that was to me this elevated life that seemed so glamorous and exciting. And I was so fascinated in the process behind all of these things that were just magic in my eyes and still are in some ways. So yeah, I mean, that's always so that part of it. I would be doing regardless of just constantly scrolling on my phone for information because I love information. The other part of it, though, it is interesting because there's just so much to talk about. And it's like this daily grind of putting things out. But it's not even like I don't consider it a hustler because there's so many aspects of my life where I'm not a hustler. This is the aspect of my life where I've never worked harder at anything in my life.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, like so many teachers will tell you, it's like, if you're really truly doing that thing you love, it doesn't feel like work. Granted, when I'm up at 3 in the morning, it does start to feel like work when you're editing at 3 in the morning. But all of it is just so exciting. Like I would release more if I could, and I never thought I could do this to begin with. So to get to this point has been really. There's aspects of it that's been really nice, but unfortunately, like I said, there's no roadmap. So I make tons of mistakes, and you learn as you go. And I also think you're in a race or an internal race against the clock. I truly think, oh man, I wish I had known this 20 years ago. I wish I had known like podcasting didn't even exist, but I wish I had really said, okay, this is something unique that you like that a lot of people like, but like you truly love it. Maybe you should lean towards this instead of really putting your eggs into like trying to be an actor,
Mhm.
or those two things can help each other. And it was very interesting to be like, wow, maybe this is why my mind did pick up all this information across the decades. So like maybe
Mhm.
this is why, like it all does lead to potentially something. But I think I think I live in a constant state of fear a lot of times of just wanting things. I don't know. I think there's been so many aspects of my life where I haven't worked at it. And now that I am working really hard at something, you just constantly, there's so many things of like, well, am I doing the right thing? Did I
Mhm.
put out the right thing? Am I getting like, to have to promote yourself? Like even just what I just had to tell you, like that to me is so inherently, it feels inherently douchey at times, even though I think the audience gets it. And
Mhm.
anybody that comes on my show, I want to make them look the best. I want to promote whatever they have. But when the spotlight's on you, it's a very uncomfortable situation. And I've always been of the mind, well, if people find me, they find me. And if they don't like me, they don't like me. I don't want to hear about it, but that's totally, there's so many great voices out there. But then you get into that line of thinking of like, oh crap, I do have to like tell people about this. I do have to shout this out. And that's the
Mhm.
thing that I don't think I will ever fully get used to because I
Mhm.
know tons of people that love it. They love to talk about themselves. They love to throw in the plugs. And my thing is like, I'd rather talk about the stuff. Like, I'd rather talk about the things that we watch and the things that we listen to and the things that we inspire us. That to
Mhm.
me is the exciting thing. And yeah, that's why I really love the podcast, because you get to have these really great conversations and you'll hear it. Like sometimes it's annoying for the audience. They'll be like, oh my God, oh my God. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Like, that's so, because you're having these conversations that I wasn't able to have growing up with
Right.
people that I really respect.
Right. And what a gift that is. I feel like, what you're talking about is to, because I grew up in the Midwest too. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago. And I feel like people from the Midwest, there's a humility to us that, and I love going back to visit. I go back every year, but I think that people are drawn to you and they're drawn to me because we are people who just enjoy what we're doing. Like you said, we enjoy the conversations, we enjoy talking about it all, but we struggle with self promotion. Myself included. It makes me feel, to use your word, so douchey to talk about like promoting my podcast and things like that. But Amy Phillips was like, Melissa, you got to do it, and I'm like, I know. And she's like, you deserve to do it too. So I do think that, like, I guess I can just relate very much to what you're saying. And just to know that from my perspective, it's just like a part of the deal, right? Because what are we doing this all for if we can't champion ourselves a little bit, right? So I kind of look at it as, I like to model and, practice what I preach. So listen, that's what we're doing. And it's okay that it's not comfortable, but here we are.
Yeah.
And, I think
No,
that's why
it's
people like us.
It's interesting, and I mean, part of the frustration thing about podcasting is like, oh my God, this is a medium where it's audio, and now all of a sudden podcasts have become video. Like it's
Mhm.
like, wait a sec, I just wanted audio. I didn't sign up to show my face all the time. Like, what are you talking about? So that's this other thing that you have to get used to keep up with things. And I think that's the interesting thing and potentially a positive thing is that it kind of still, 4 years in, you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zones. And maybe there is something good in that at the end of the day. It's,
Mhm.
you have so many decades of negative thoughts built up that you have to combat decades of negative thoughts. But like each time you do it, or each time you step up to the mic, I always consider that like an at bat. Like you're putting yourself another hour into those 10,000 hours that makes you an expert on something.
Mhm.
And that is a very exciting process if you're able to convince your mind to look at it that way.
Right. And I think that what you're talking about is so important is that, I was talking about this with someone on another podcast, how it's like we're regular people who are chasing this passion, but it's attached to things that are maybe not inherently comfortable for us. Like for me, the more attention I get nervous, like straight up. I
Oh,
actually
yeah.
do you
Oh, man.
experience that?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, and especially if something blows up, like if you've done something where it gets into the press or something like that with a Bravo celebrity or a reality star, I get nervous opening up those things because I'm like, oh God, like, or having somebody review it or and that's part of, I guess, the social contract that you've signed up for. But it
Mhm.
is something that I don't know if I would ever get used to. And you also then have to like think 10 steps down the road of, well, this is potentially what reality stars feel, or even like people like Beyonce and Taylor. Imagine how much that must, or it could have the potential to take somebody down, the amount of millions of voices saying yay or nay. And it's not even just because it's not like this automatic, like you're doing that on a daily, weekly, yearly basis. Like,
Mhm.
if Taylor puts out a bad album, you're going to hear about it. If Beyonce doesn't land, they're going to hear about it. And it is trying to find that, like cutting through that noise, and also like going, okay, at the end of the day, just focus on what you think and put what you think out there in your voice, and then let the cards fall as they
Mhm.
may. But that's a really hard thing too, like to really stand by your convictions, but also be flexible enough to learn from your mistakes. And I think reality TV is a great training ground because season to season, we're up and down on these characters. I always use the thing of like, well, as humans, we have bad seasons in our own life. Of course, reality stars are going to have the same. Like last year, horrible season in my life. Sure, there were great
Hmm.
things happening, but a horrible season. Maybe next year I'm going to have a comeback season. Maybe next year I'll have my redemption arc. And that's an interesting way, but it also muddies the brain, just like we see with Tom Sandoval, where it's like, man, your brain is pudding at this point. If you read the New York Times article, you're like, dude, you're talking about living your life in three separate takes, each moment of your actual life. And when you start to think of your life that way, I think that it becomes like a horror film.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that, I was reading a study about how even having 10,000 followers or more on Instagram is enough to change your brain.
Oh,
It's essentially like, it's essentially like, you know, it's having this self-confidence, um, to understand why people appreciate you, but you also can't sort of drink your own Kool-Aid, for lack of a better term, right?
oh,
Like, and it's funny because I think people like you and me, people who don't, and again, this is why I'm glad we're talking about it, people who know you, or listen to you, or know me, listen to me. I think sometimes they assume that we are just super confident, right?
yeah, I
We're
know,
like,
right? Yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah. Or I hear like, oh, I don't buy this thing. Him saying he's nervous or insecure. I'm like, dude, come live with me. Like, ask the handful of close friends that I do have if
right.
Ryan Bailey was a nervous person that was very insecure before this. Like, that's what's so great. I mean, that's not great at all, but and social media, like you said, is just, you can't take anything. It's not real. I mean, it's
Right.
real in the relationship sometimes you make through it, and if you can make somebody laugh or maybe provide a point or something, that's excellent. But also, it's an like it's an insane stressor. Like I have DMs that I have not read in 4 years. Like, I mean, like, and I couldn't even begin. So, every
Mhm.
day you're like, oh fuck, like, like for I think a whole year I was like, I'm going to get to all the DMs, and then I just I don't even. I'll see whatever's there at that moment, and then I go like, I can't do, I put out too
Yeah.
much content, but also it's not good for my brain to
Right.
have so many conversations happening at once. A lot of them are like, great, you're funny, this is helping, really made a change. But like, and some of them are like, you don't know what you're effing talking about. And also just the way people perceive you without really kind of taking into any context of who I am as a person. And especially if you are somebody insecure or have been trying to find out who they are as a person their whole life, it can be really messy on the mind. And so you have to
Mhm.
start really trying to plant yourself and to have a really solid foundation
Mhm.
that you can work from. Because if not, you can get swept away so easily. And I know that sounds so silly, you
Mhm.
guys, because it's like, oh, it's just a podcast, it's just Bravo. But you got to remember, parasocial relationships are so, um, you know, it hasn't even been studied enough. Like, this is still all relatively new. And
Mhm.
you your mind plays these, like, oh, this is actually a real friend. You've never met your real friend, but it's a real friend. You've never met them. And then you start taking time away from your actual life because you're so involved in these things that you've created and parasocial relationships. It can be really, really messy. And that's why I don't
Mhm.
understand sometimes how these people do it. And I don't mean like, hey, everybody deserves to be litigious on Bravo about it. No, I don't mean law, but like, there is no training ground for what to do with this platform. And you see some people using it correctly or lucking into using it correctly, and some people completely falling by the wayside. And you see how it then affects their overall health because they are just dependent on being on TV instead of
Mhm.
actually working on another career, another thing. Like,
Right.
if tomorrow I'm told I cannot talk about Bravo anymore, well, okay, there's so many other things that I would love to talk about. Like, let's get into that as well. I don't know. I have
Yeah.
so many thoughts on this, so sorry to overtalk.
No, right. You're not over talking at all. I truly appreciate, this conversation, because I think it is really important for people who listen to us. And I know people all the time, they think that I am so together and this and that. And I'm like, well, your bitch therapist is, but the human behind Melissa, she is struggling, honey. So I think that for me, it's always good to talk about that, because I know at least my audience, they are I'm so, so lucky. They are a bunch of empathetic, beautiful souls, trauma survivors, just wonderful, great people. And I think that when we share this stuff, it helps them feel like, okay,
Yeah.
it's normalizing, it's validating, because Ryan the human and Melissa the human, we're human beings and therefore imperfect and flawed. And, we do have insecurities and all these things. So I just think it's a great thing to be able to honestly talk about. And so
Well, I
I
mean,
just,
here's a perfect example. Like yesterday, where I posted something the other day when I think it was the Brandy Glanville lawsuit came out, and I think we've
oh
had like
man.
30 lawsuits since then. But or no, it was the Leah McSweeney one, and I said I didn't pay my car insurance this month, must blame Andy Cohen. And then I was like, gotta sue. And that's like an obvious joke, poking fun at a very sensitive situation, right? Like, I understand the sensitivity in regards to this situation, but I always want to put some kind of silly joke or spin on it,
Mhm.
or something that just kind of makes me laugh, or how I view things in that moment. So then I wake up the next morning, and it's just really fascinating. And this is how we're primed as an audience. And I've done this myself. I wake up to comments of like, you and your thinning hairline, you piece of shit. You can't even, like, you failed as an actor, and and I'm like, wild. Like, that is so wild that
Wild.
somebody, and it's always like under like a hidden photo or like some,
Mhm.
and I'm like, this is so interesting because it's somebody that's paying very close attention, and is somebody that is immediately angered, but then not that, wants to point out flaws that this other person has to try to hurt back.
Right.
And I think that's a very interesting thing. And it really is kind of shocking that we are primed like that as audience members, like we feel that rage. It is, kind of a full contact sport at this point. And
Mhm.
I always like kind of try to like, it's like, I don't know. It's very interesting. I have certain rules for myself, but I will say it is interesting when people react in a certain way,
Right.
and that wanting to take somebody down, or I think it's really very interesting. You know?
It is very interesting, and it's, I think the thing for, I'll speak for me anyway, is that, we've talked privately, and I've had my fair share of haters, and they say you haven't made it until you have haters, and boy, honey, have I made it then, because yikes. Um, some people really hate me. And which is fine. I always say that you can be the sweetest peach on the tree, and some people just don't like peaches, right? So that's one part of it. But I think there's another part of it that people, because of these parasocial relationships, they think that they can just say these atrocious things, but it's like they forget that Ryan is human, and they forget that Melissa is human, right? And so for me, I understand it from a psychological point of view, but from a personal point of view, I think that's where, you and I both struggle, because you and I are types of people who I would never speak to anybody like that. Like, I would rather die than
Well,
hurt
most likely they
somebody.
wouldn't either, but that's the shield of social media. That's the
Right.
interesting thing, is that normally these people wouldn't either, or at least that's what I prefer to believe. They don't go around calling people fat and ugly, but they feel very within their rights to do it online. And I think that's the interesting thing of all of this. But also, reality shows live and die by second screen technology. The
Hmm.
only reason Bravo or any reality television is successful is because of second screen technology. It's because of people fighting back and forth. It's because it primes the audience. That's what makes it different than any scripted show or movie, is that, you can fight about movies, sure, but with reality shows, you dig in. It is like going to war every day, or that's how we are primed to look at it, or that's what I've noticed. And by the way, folks, I really want to make this clear as well. These are my opinions. I am not trying to mansplain reality TV. This is what I've noticed from being a fan of these shows for 30 years, and also now doing a show for 4 years. This is what I've just noticed. And it can really be a really fun avenue to explore with people, but it can also, just like anything, have a really dark downside for everybody involved.
Absolutely. And to be clear, I don't think that that's what you were doing. I think that, I know as a straight, white cis man, right? There's sometimes
Don't spread that around. Don't spread that around. You're not. Let's.
but Ryan, I think truly that's why your opinion and your voice is important in this space, because there's not a lot of straight men doing this. I mean, there's a bunch of people, Nick Vial and a whole bunch of these people coming, but I feel like when you started, it wasn't the norm. So, listen, your voice is just as important as,
Well,
everybody else's is.
yeah, I mean, well, also when you also you can't drink the Kool-Aid ever of like thinking you're important. Like, oh, my voice truly matters. It's like, no, I started this because it was like every day I step into the mic, it's like a conversation with the audience. It's just that I'm the loudmouth. Like I want to hear what people are saying back. I love that. I mean, I got into this, and now thinking back on it, I just realized I have a whole different way of viewing it, or like going into Facebook groups and realizing those existed. And man, I would spend all day talking shit about Bravo celebrities. And I was shocked that everybody knew what I was talking about. They all had this, we all this incredible language. But now as you move further into this and as it gets bigger and things, you start to look at those a little differently of, man, it's wild. And I think the Ariana stuff of it all is just really interesting to watch on social media how, or even Crystal last night on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, I'll be like, I think of it this way. And then you'll go online and you'll be like, oh, Crystal annoys the shit out of me. I hate her. I hate her. She's got to go. And I'm like, that's what you took from that? And I think
Right.
that's like kind of the interesting thing. And it also shows there's a place for everybody. But sometimes I'm just like, man, I wonder if I didn't do the podcast, if that's where I would be ranting on social media because I didn't have a platform in which to put my voice out.
Right. And, so that's a good point. And let's start, getting into some of this is because I definitely want to get your thoughts on, and it seems like my last podcast, I just talked about this is that, there are certain housewives, Kyle's one of them. People just love to hate her. I mean, they love to hate her. And people like me, they call me a Kyle apologist, which is like my least favorite term on the planet, just because for me, I'm always going to see people's humanity, right? I think that, having not everyone has to share their opinion all the time, number one. And number two, our opinions are shaded by our perspective, right? So, when you see an observable behavior, for example, let's take the text that Kyle sent
And
to
Dorit,
Dorit and Dorit made it public, right? I what I got so fascinated about was reading the text and then seeing everyone on the internet pop off. And it's like there's either, no, this is not manipulative. Yes, it is. It's black and white. And I'm like, I think that's where we get ourselves in trouble because things are rarely black and white. But people will just dig their heels in on the internet and etc. So can I get your take, Ryan, on, well, I know that you saw it. I'm not sure if you read the whole text,
yeah, I
but
did. Yeah,
what did you think about that?
the text itself, or the fact that it was aired on TV.
Both.
Well, I mean, listen, um, the text itself, I mean, it just goes to show you, and I always try to point this out, is that remember, these are reality shows. This isn't necessarily their real life. This isn't a documentary. This is a reality TV show. So it's not like cameras just happen to be there at all times. These are scheduled shoots. You know who you shoot with, you mic up for the day, there's like a little bit of an outline potentially. And the text itself, we realize with Kyle, who, by the way, I'm a Kyle apologist as well, but what Kyle does, you have to look at it two ways. It's very respectable as a human being. This is somebody trying to protect their family. And this is why Kyle always gets herself in hot water too, because she does try to protect her actual reality. She'll give us she'll dole out little pieces, like I'll give you a little appetizer, but I'm going to keep the real stuff really secluded, and I am going to protect these things because, obviously Kyle is somebody that worries constantly. Her
Mm-hmm.
mind must just be going 90 miles an hour at all times. You can tell she's very concerned. So of course you're going to reach out to somebody and say, listen. Now, unfortunately, though, then it blends in with the reality show of it all. And Dorit, still looking to hold her diamond next season, is like, listen, if we're going to talk about it, Kyle hasn't been a good friend. And now she's reaching out the night before and like all of a sudden, not saying that this is what Dorit thought, but Dorit now has a little bit of a storyline to go into the reunion with on something that was already bothering Dorit to begin with. Because
Mm-hmm.
all the time, you'll these reality stars will also confuse real relationships with show relationships. And like I said, like even that finale when Erica Jane came to talk to Kyle, where it's like that was a scheduled shoot. Eric is going to be the person that comes in. Do I think Kyle texts with Erica and hangs out with her on a daily, weekly basis? No, not if filming isn't happening. Like Kyle said it last night. I have a certain friend group. That friend group, guys, is not on this show. These
Right.
are show friendships, which can be very powerful. And in some, they're very real friendships that actually they are in each other's lives. But
Mhm.
that's not Kyle. And that really
Right.
has to hurt Dorit, who has like convinced herself this is a very real friendship. But also, like we know in our own lives, friendships have seasons.
Mhm.
Somebody can be there at the right moment at the right time. And then sometimes you take a break and then they'll pick back up at some point. But Dorit
Mhm.
has been heard about this for a long time. But Kyle, like I said, it's admirable as a human being what she's done and doing this season. As a reality star, it's completely frustrating to watch
Right.
her do this as an audience because we know there is so much more there because they
Yeah.
give you all the pieces. They give you the map. Your friend passed away unexpectedly. Your relationship has broken up. You gave up alcohol. Your relationship with Kathy has been fraught. We saw it since the last reunion, obviously something you work about. You've lost so much weight. You've done all of these things. The Morgan weight of it all. I mean, she went in knowing that this relationship was already over. And like Kyle said, I don't have a good poker face. So she knew going in that she was already protecting things. And that's why we have silly conversations like the esophagus to try to throw it somewhere else. And she had the hot potato this season, and she's not good with the hot potato. And
Mhm.
that's why she is so upset at people like Sutton for questioning anybody that questions anything because damn it, I've been here 13 years. I don't deserve this. Not realizing her own behavior throughout all of these seasons with her castmates. It's a very uncomfortable position for Kyle to be in. So that's what
Mhm.
these shows have turned into is then reading between the lines of going, oh, what's fascinating is that this is probably what the reality of this situation is. And she won't come out and just tell us definitively because my theory is that she wants to put her own house in order. She has very
Mhm.
real children. Like the
Mhm.
children are real, like even if
Right.
they're real kids,
Right.
she has had a very real marriage. These are real things. Do you
Right.
want to put the reality of that situation on camera for the rest of time? For the rest of
Well,
time, we will be able to pick up Peacock and go, hey, let's watch that season where their marriage falls completely apart. That will always be there. And I think Kyle sometimes is a person that wants her cake and to eat it too,
yeah, and listen, I agree with that. Kyle's human and therefore imperfect. And I definitely think that, what I have been saying is that I think in her it's hard to talk about what is when you don't know what it is, right? And so from a therapeutic perspective, I'm watching somebody who in my opinion is going through what I would call a delayed adolescence. So she spent her whole life I've done a lot of research into like her family history, and I've done a podcast about like the House of Hilton and
Yeah,
how her
that
and
book.
Kathy and yeah, right? So it's like Kyle was trained to be like this bot of a person, right? Be perfect. And that's why she has anxiety, in my opinion. It's like be a perfect
Yeah.
daughter, be a perfect sister, be a perfect mother, be a perfect wife. And I think that Lorraine's death, it truly, like, I wrote this in my notes. If Lorraine didn't die, this whole season, I believe, would have played out wholly different, completely
Totally.
differently.
Totally.
I think even Kyle and Mauricio's relationship would have been different had Lorraine not passed away. I think that for me, that was a formidable moment for her where she said, I've been living for everybody else. How do I want the rest of my story to be told? Right?
And she
Do
says,
I
and
want
she
to?
says very clearly, they aired it again last night. I want to spend time with people. Why? I want to spend time with people that I want to spend time with. It's a very simple thing that a lot of us aren't brave enough to actually enact in our own lives. But
Mhm.
Kyle's had these life changing events that she is actually trying to put that plan in motion for the remainder of her life, which is admirable. It's just that she's also on a reality television show.
Right. And we're also watching the mess of it, right? So, like you had talked about, the last year for you was your hardest season. And for me, the last 3 years were my hardest season. This year, finally, I feel like I'm coming on the other side of, recovering from my trauma. But I guess what my point is that if cameras were pointed at us when we are going through those hard seasons, woof. I mean, the
Oh
feedback,
God.
right? Like,
Oh, it would be like, that's why I always like, I would never do a reality show, because why would you ever want to find the aspect of your personality that would get exploited, and you would
right.
have to see your Achilles heel week in, week out, and it's already hard enough to be a human, and then you throw, like I said, everybody else's opinion on it. And I will say with Kyle though, like I think I know what she's doing, but I don't know if I could argue that it's been successful or not, or if it's caused
Mhm,
more problems along the way. And
mhm,
when you're trying to like keep all of these balls in the air, one of them's going to fall. You are going to make a mess. And like you said, yeah, she's human. We're fallible. All of these things are correct. I just think overall, health wise, like it almost felt like this season was a race for Kyle to finish filming. And that's why on her last talking head, she has like,
mhm.
are we done yet? And she leans, and starts crying. And I think that was a very real moment, because I
Yeah,
think she just kept telling herself, I just have to get through. I just
right.
have to get through. And that's why probably at the end of the reunion, very emotional for her. And she probably felt excellent for at least a day after that, until all the demons started haunting her again.
Well, I guess we'll see what part 2 and 3 reveal, because here's the thing I have to say. So part 1 of reunions, they vacillate from sleepy to, okay. I have to say I'm interested to see what the other reunions part. Do we know if it's 2 parts or 3 parts? Do we
Three
know that?
parts, three
Okay.
parts.
I don't know about you, Ryan, but for me, I was kind of like surprised by part 1. I was like, wow, this is actually we're getting already to a lot of topics. And so I look forward to part 2 and 3, because for me, how did you feel about, reunion part 1 overall?
It was good. I mean, in the sense of we did deal with a lot of issues. I like the crystal of it all. Dorit really took a shellacking, I feel like, in
Mhm.
multiple things.
Deservedly so.
Yeah, deservedly so. And Dorit is not the best communicator at times, even though I think she thinks she is. And even after all these seasons, I still think she thinks she is, even though we have so much evidence that she's not.
Mhm.
And it becomes a punchline, which you almost feel bad for her about. But yeah, we've got so much more to cover, and it's going to really be interesting to see how they do with that. And there's so much speculation about the Morgan of it all, and are we going to have this big moment? And I don't think we're going to have the big moment that everybody thinks. I think we're going to step right up to that precipice, and we're not going to go over it. Like I think
Mhm.
you're not going to get the yes, I am bisexual and this is my girlfriend. Like, I think we might get some hints of I would be open to things, but I don't
Mhm.
think so. If you look at Kyle's game plan, I just don't know if that would necessarily fit. I could be completely wrong, you guys. It's not the popular opinion. I do think there is a world in which we get that announcement down the line or after all of this airs. But remember
Mhm.
also, we have Buying Beverly Hills season 2 premiering on Netflix directly after the third part of the reunion, which continues this storyline because Kyle now is filming on that season. And so it's interesting when you start
Yeah.
monetizing your grief in that way. I think this is a very real situation, folks, but I do think they did have a team meeting and go, okay, if I'm going to do your show, Love Bean, you've got to do mine. And we've got to have these conversations. And then it becomes this argument of who's being more truthful on which streaming platform.
Right, and that's what has thrown me about this whole thing is the reality TV of it all. It just has made it feel for me kind of gross and messy and like, yeah, how did that work with why did we hear so little about it on Beverly Hills, but on Buying Beverly Hills, that's going to be like a main conversation. Is that a production thing? Is that a Kyle thing? Like I'm just not savvy enough in this field to know.
My
But
speculation is that Kyle protected herself on Beverly Hills as she's done a long time. Not
Mhm.
that, and Maurizio did not have those same stipulations. And also, he's trying to make that show a success. It is interesting when people want more and more and more. Like the agency's so big, but now I want reality stardom on top of it. At a certain point, I'm like,
Right.
would I want to buy a house from the guy that's on TV? Like that's the thing that I find so interesting and weird. And we're having very real conversations with the daughters that we've seen now on the Netflix show that seem deeper. Like Kyle's
Mhm.
in it, but I don't know how much, if we're going to get more honesty out of Kyle over there, but I think we are going to get more conversation and honesty out of Mauricio's side of the story
Right.
because, in the final finale, we found out that it was a trust issue that she was never able to come back from with Mauricio.
Right. And so, there's so much speculation about what this trust issue is. And I guess what frustrates me most about people on the internet is people are so certain. They have convinced themselves that they know what's happening in these people's lives. And I think that's what drives me the most crazy is it's like we do not know what is happening with these people in real life. We see snippets of them on TV, and how much of that is manufactured or isn't. But I just find that aspect of it so interesting. And I hear people talking about, well, I'm going to boycott buying Beverly Hills or, whatever.
I always love when people are like, "I'm not gonna watch it again." Yeah, you are. You
Yeah,
are. And
we
like
all
if
are.
not if
Yeah.
not now, you'll watch it later. Like what I mean, why be so silly to like just throw statements like that out there? Like always let just things play out. You feel that now. Wait until it comes out. See what you think. Even like the same thing with the Valley with Jax and Doty of like, I'm not gonna watch this trash. You probably are. Like eventually you will. Why
Yeah.
make a bold declaration right out of the gate?
Well, and did you see today? So I want to, before we fully get into the reunion, I want to touch on a couple of things. And this isn't typical for my podcast, but like I said, today's episode is new for me too. So welcome to it, y'all. Um,
They're like, we
but
hate the new podcast format, Melissa.
I'm sure some people
Yeah.
will. Listen, you can't please everybody, and you just can't. But and now, honestly, I'm going to be honest. I completely lost my train of thought.
No, we're talking about the news of today of Jax and
Oh, thank you.
Brittany and yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so Jackson Brittany today announced that they are taking some time. Internet sleuths had kind of, and that's wild too, is you have these people on the internet who are so intent on looking for every teeny little clue to know something about somebody's life. And it's like, okay, so they are taking a little break. Are you happy? I mean, that's sad and that's hard. And a lot of people aren't surprised. I mean, Jax is arguably one of my least favorite reality TV folks, just generally speaking. In fact,
Yeah.
fun fact, I didn't really start watching Vanderpump until he was exiting because I just
Oh wow. What a
it,
weird time to come into that show.
right? And so I have since gone back and watched because I wanted to have some sort of frame of reference. But so we got the news today that Jax and Brittany are taking a beat, living separately for a moment, whatever that means to them. I'm not going to label it. And the other major breaking news today has been that Rachel Leviss is suing Tom Sandoval and Ariana. And so I just, breaking news. What are your hot takes on this, Ryan?
I don't know if they're hot takes. I mean, like with the Rachel stuff of it all, I had made a video earlier of just saying, oh, you have to pay attention to the timing of this, who's involved. And with Rachel, my fear is, obviously her attorneys are Mark Garagos and Brian Friedman. And if those names sound familiar, they should, because they're also Brandy Glanville's attorney. And they're also Bethany Frankel's attorneys she hired in July for the Reality Reckoning. So this is a coordinated, it's a concerted effort. I don't know if it's a coordinated attack, but it certainly does feel that way, where they're all coming out in the same week, the same time frame. And this is going to be to a larger thing. My worry about with Rachel is that I just don't want her to be used by somebody else like
Right.
she was used by Tom. I don't
Right.
want her to, and that's why I felt the Rachel podcast with Bethany Frankel, over the summer was such a missed opportunity for Bethany, because it just felt like she was trying to push her narrative instead of
Right.
actually hearing Rachel's narrative that we all wanted to hear. I have listened to a couple episodes of Rachel's podcast, and I found it like, wow, who thought we would get to a point where Rachel's the better communicator than Tom Sandoval? Like, but
Right.
now it's like hands down. It's hard. Like I want to read more of the court documents, but I do
Right.
think if you're going to really get in this sandbox, why didn't you just do another season of Vanderpump? Like, and it does sometimes. What I worry about is that it does seem like it has shades of money grab. It has shades of attention. And I thought, and this is potentially the wrong perspective, but it's very frustrating when I see somebody on a very good path somebody of self exploration and trying to learn their own patterns of behavior. But then when you start to monetize those things, you're falling right back into reality television, anyways.
Mhm.
You're in that sandbox, and I don't think this was Rachel's idea. She might be fully in support of this as now, but I don't think this is. And at the end of the day, this wasn't a storyline on Vanderpump Rules. This was a
Mhm.
storyline that happened in real life, away from the cameras, of Tom, screen recording a very personal moment of Rachel sexually. And then
Mhm.
also, what I'm guessing this involves too is that I think Ariana sent that video to herself when she caught Tom that night a year ago, or it'll have
Mhm.
been like a year and a couple days when this airs. And
Mhm.
I think that's the distribution of said materials. Ariana has sworn up and down she was not sending this to anybody. I find it unfortunate that Ariana is a part of this, and I
Yeah.
don't understand in certain way. I don't know. I just feel like at the end of the day, this is adding more therapy for everyone involved. And Tom, you should really get back on that horse,
Oh
and
God.
do some. But Rachel, like, it's frustrating. Like, it is frustrating. And I think sometimes it clouds the overall message. Where I thought, wow, like, you really look at this work. I don't know. We're such a litigious society now, and when you see all of these
Right.
things happen at once from the same lawyers, I don't know. I
Yeah. I mean,
It's
listen,
not
those
even a
are
belief thing. It's not about belief. Like, I believe Tom did this. I believe
right.
that, like, I believe those things. I'm not questioning that. Just questioning the other things involved in this. And it doesn't seem like she's standing on her own 2 feet, but
Right.
standing on others who have, like, I don't know. I don't know. What do you think, Melissa? You're the
But what you're saying is what I feel too, is that it's so messy, right? Is that, I am a fierce advocate for victims, for marginalized groups, for people struggling with mental health issues, and people, to me, there is a piece of this that is like, yes, she was violated by those screen recordings. And from what I understand, and I'm waiting for the Bravo docket ladies to weigh in on this, is that California law, revenge porn laws are very, very huge
Yep.
in California. And so not only does it seem like she has a case, there's a part of me that's like, well, of course I support that and I advocate for that, because what Tom Sandoval did was wrong, and it's absolutely unacceptable. Now, I think where she misses people is throwing Ariana into it. Because and I agree with you that the timeline also feels. I worry too that Rachel's being taken advantage
I
of.
mean,
I'm going to
on the
say that.
the eve of the 1 year anniversary of Scandival, this comes out in the same week. Leah McSweeney, Brandy Glanville last week,
Right.
Bethany Frankel making her TikToks. That's the part. Like, you're right. She does have a quote unquote case, but also the language of these court papers. When you start catching, it's wild. And like, never in a million years did I think part of my daily life would be reading court papers, but here we are. And like I always said years ago, like during the Erica Jane, Tom Girardi stuff, I was like, I wonder how many people are going to become lawyers inspired by this case, because everybody did so much digging.
Mhm.
But I think with Rachel, some of the language, even in these documents, of like ruined her reputation and this and that and this and that. And you could make that argument, but I do want to point out this was not a storyline on the show until this got caught and they picked back up cameras. They had hit it very successfully up until that moment where Tom got caught. The other thing is, even if reality cameras were not following her, she'd be vilified in real life.
Right.
She should
Right.
be vilified. She did something wrong. We can move
Right.
on from that. We can as humans get past that. We can build ourselves up, which I thought, man, like sending herself to a mental health facility. Hell yes.
Mhm.
I was so not pleased is the word, like, I'm not a Rachel fan, but
Impressed, maybe.
I was
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that's a really
Yeah.
tough decision to make for your overall mental health, because we see how Tom didn't do that and the misery that he's putting himself through and still doesn't even realize it.
Mhm.
But you're going to be vilified in life for things that you do wrong.
Right.
That is not sometimes the network's fault that you did something wrong in your own time away from cameras, because then so now are we going to start suing audience members? Is that where we're headed? Because
Mhm.
is that, I mean, truly, is that where we're headed? You think bad about something that I did was wrong, and I don't like that. The Tom
Mhm.
stuff, definitely a leg to stand on, of course.
Mhm.
100%. I just get a little cloudy when it talks about her being vilified and promoted as a
Sure.
villain. But it's like that's also the genre that you chose to be in. We have enough seasons of reality
Right.
television at this point to understand. And like I
Right.
beg anybody wanting to be on these shows from this point on, do your research.
Right.
Know the arena that you are getting yourself into, that you are willingly getting yourself into. And that's the
Right.
part that becomes frustrating as an audience. I'm trying to watch Summer House and enjoy it, you guys. I want to watch
It's
The Traders.
I think it's a case of two things can be true, right? So Rachel was victimized, but she also needs to be accountable for her role in the
I thought, and
behaviors.
in a lot of ways, she has been. Like when you listen to
Sure.
certain aspects of the podcast, I'm like, okay, wow, she really has recognized this behavior.
Right.
Then it just though, when we're starting to get litigious and money starts becoming involved, and I hate to break it to everybody, guess what, you guys? Corporations, I hate to break this to everybody, they are there to make money. Like, period. Like,
Right.
guys, like at the end, and guys, this is not just in the last year. Through the beginning of time, this is what corporations are there for.
Mhm.
So we also have to realize that, like, and just because something is successful doesn't mean they're like, well, good, we're going to pay everybody extra. No, they have a contract. You are contracted for these things. And so it's interesting after the fact to then go in and, of course, complain about the success of something and wanting a piece of that. That's just not the reality of a contractual situation. And I know that's very
Right.
cold and unfeeling, but corporations are cold and unfeeling.
Well, and listen, what you're speaking is just you're just spitting truth. I mean, that's just the reality of it, right? And so, do I think what I understand about mental health treatment is that it's a place where she went is going to be very expensive. And so,
Yeah.
did some of
Didn't
this
they say like
contribute?
200,000 or something
Uh,
like that? Wasn't it something astronomical?
I can I just be the first person to say I don't understand therapy in LA. I don't understand it. I don't
Oh, Melissa,
It's like
I mean, oh God,
so
and dealing with
gross.
insurance companies to try to
Ugh,
get like a therapist under your insurance plan. And if you don't, it's really expensive to like, you're
it's
trying to do something
awful.
right for yourself. And it's one of those things, they make it really hard. And my mom always said, you got to be the best advocate for your health. And I will
That's
take it
right.
one step further. You got to be the best advocate for your mental health. But in doing so, you're going to be wildly disillusioned with the process because nobody makes it easy. They put roadblocks up for you to try to help yourself. And then
Right.
you just wind up in bed watching reality television instead of actually working on yourself sometimes. Or you start a
That's right.
podcast. All very, very potentially toxic.
Like we all
Yeah.
do, Ryan.
Yeah,
Like we do,
exactly.
okay? We
Yeah.
take our trauma and we turn it into, a podcast.
Yeah.
So I being mindful of time, I want to try to move on to talk about some of the big moments from the reunion that we got. One thing that it just my therapist brain, I just have to point out is in the very beginning when Sutton was talking to, is it Avi? Is that
Uh-huh.
her?
Her
Avi?
assistant.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. When she was talking to Avi and they were both, saying like strong Sutton, no crying. And just
Sorry.
that it makes me want to rip my skin off because I'm just like, can we stop this bullshit stigma that like crying is somehow weakness? That it's
I
like
know, right?
it's like crying is like an appropriate response to an insane amount of bullshit. Can we just like put that out there?
But that's the forum. These ladies, you don't want to be taken as weak in front of these ladies, like we've had many scenes of Erica Jane fighting tears or like mascara tears or, and everybody does it, but it becomes this, is it going to be used against me? Is it going to be weaponized against me? I'm all for trying to be as emotional as possible, but it is interesting to see how somebody would build that up in their mind to be like, do not portray weakness,
Mhm.
get through this. And I think sometimes you want to sit them down very lovingly and say, as an audience, we want to see you go there. That's what we're here
Right.
for, is those very real moments that give us bravery to go there in our own lives
That's right.
and to be very expressing of what we're feeling and how scary some things are and the human condition and those greater truths. I don't want to see somebody fighting their real emotions because the
Right.
camera picks that up as well. And we're a very savvy
Right.
audience and we can see through that. And these shows are starting to become, like I said, this read between the lines shows where you're having to take all of this other information, see what
Mhm.
you're seeing with your own eyes, even though you're being told by somebody else's mouth that it's not true. And you're having to make this kind of educated guess on what the reality of the reality is.
Right. It's exhausting for audience members to try to figure out. Now, instead of watching the show, it's like you got to watch the show and you got to look at Twitter and you got to look at
You got to
Instagram and
listen
you
to everybody's podcast, and
right, listen to me and Ryan talk about, you know what I mean?
you
It's
got to
like
read court papers. Yeah.
it's just it is like so much, but here's a fun theory that I'm gonna put out there. So we got a glimpse into Sutton having like a physical reaction when Kathy came out. My
Well,
arg
guys, we're assuming that Kathy came out. That could be Frankenstein editing.
fair, good point, and fair enough. But whatever to me, it wasn't about Kathy. To me, it's an example of when we try to hold our shit together, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
body's
Yeah.
going to react to that. Like our body's
Yes.
going to be like, no, bitch, we're doing this now. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's my theory in terms of, maybe she did have a medical event. Hopefully we do figure that out and hopefully she is fine. But I do strongly believe that when we pack it in and we hold it tight and we just try to be a good little soldier, our body tells us this isn't happening. So that's
Yeah.
my theory on that.
Yeah, I mean, completely. Yeah, it's a very human reaction. If you are so stressed out about something and, building something up in your mind, you are going to have a physical reaction. And on top of that, all those lights, all that excitement, all of that, it's a really pressure cooker situation.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't know how those women sit up so straight for hours and hours and hours and hours and they pose and they sit, and I'm like, girl, I would be exhausted. But listen, I guess they're pros at it. So here's something funny that, there's been a lot of conversation around Dorit's reunion look. And I did say that she really was reminded me of Delia Dietz from Beetlejuice, Catherine O'Hara's character in Beetlejuice. Like it was like the hair on the forehead, Delia Dietz was like huge
the
on
Superman
like
curl. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it was a cross between giving Delia Dietz and then also like E.T. while sitting down.
Yeah,
And
I did a meme about E.T. and Elliot last night with Dorit.
yes.
And it was very, but that's kind of what Dorit is known for, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, it's like Delia Dietz, Catherine O'Hara's character in Beetlejuice, which by the way, if you haven't seen that, it's a great movie, but like she was very avant-garde. And I think that's what Dorit prides herself in. But I just think that like a little more focus on content rather than the look of it all. Like, I think that's the interesting thing about these housewives is they get so focused on like the image of it all that they forget to
Be real.
Yeah. Yeah.
They forget,
Like
and it's style over substance. And
that's
Beverly
Dorit.
Hills a long time has been that show. I mean, it's got interesting in the last 4 or 5 seasons, but before that, I always said it's like the Michael Bay who directed all these like kind of soulless blockbusters, like Transformers movies and da da da. I was like, oh, it's big and bright and shiny and it makes a lot of money, and that's how Beverly Hills was for me for a long time. It was just style over substance. But it's interesting when these ladies are presented with substance and actual real conversations. Dorit, especially, unfortunately, we find her lacking in those ways to defend herself. And I would be really interested in how much introspection Dorit has done on herself. We know she's gone to therapy for her putsta or PTSD. And I would wonder how much, I wonder where that comes from. I wonder also, I think at the end of the day, even in those conversations with Garcelle, like, sometimes I'd be like, hey, Garcelle, I'm just really scared right now. I sometimes don't know what I'm saying, and I want to keep up in this conversation, and the world is so like, sometimes you're just like, you can feel her trying to hang on. And sometimes it's like, it's okay to say that you can't hang on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for me is what summarizes Dorit is frustrating. And what frustrates me is I don't like people online discounting her trauma. I don't like that. I'm never going to support that. There were statements made about, well, Camille Grammer made some really nasty comments about how this has been her storyline for 2 years and she's boring and this and that. And it's like, I have complex PTSD. And so as someone who deals with that, I just, I do have a knee jerk reaction and I just don't like that because it's like, whether you like her or not, like that's something.
The vortex of Housewives too, is because it's not only the show, you then have to fight with other housewives wanting to get back on the show. Well, let me tell you, when in my day, I shared everything. And if you'd only bring me back for another season, you'd see that. Like, you also
Exactly.
then have to take into account the context of it and everything surrounding it. As Camille's tried to come back on this show now for so many years, and I'm
Oh,
not
for
saying I don't
years.
want her on the show, but I'm saying that also clouds everything. As she's going to hit harder when she sees something a little off because she wants back. Like, we saw that with Brandy Glanville for so many years, and now look where
Mhm.
it got us,
Right.
and that these are the kind of things you have to watch out for is the the ecosystem of housewives and that feeder system into other shows. And I sometimes just wish, like, go on, get on with your life. And if Bravo comes calling, great, take the call.
Mhm.
But if not, get on with your life. Like,
Right.
please, what is the point for you to be aspirational for the audience if all I think is you're just at home waiting for that call? Like, get on with things. Stop. I don't
Right.
need you commenting on the show.
Right, and, like, Camille has just done that so egregiously to me over the last couple years. It's like, please, you're telling on yourself right now, just go away." Like,
This can't be
that's
good for her IBS. I mean, like, this cannot be good. By the way, if you don't, Camille Grammer was the face of IBS many years ago when she
was.
was with Kelsey Grammer. Kelsey Grammer encouraged her to speak out about her battle with IBS. And so, as somebody that battles IBS, I took so much
Me
inspiration and
too.
courage from Camille Grammer. But I just imagine these situations. This can't be good for the tummy.
Not good for the tummy. And as an IBS sufferer too, I'm with you. My God, we should start a support group.
I
Okay, so
know.
the last thing I kind of wanted to really talk about was the Garcelle, Dorit, Crystal of it all. Because the moment where, they're trying to talk to Dorit about her privilege, which she clearly has, right?
Yeah.
And she makes the child bride comment, and, Garcelle just mutters under her breath, and she's like, see, this is what I'm talking about. It was just such a perfect, hilarious moment of like, in real life, Dorit, this is what people are talking about, that you lack an awareness, and she is clearly unaware of the word attack and how her language can be used, and how, for white people, that word is different than for people in the BIPOC community, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color. So, that for me, that was a moment where I was really happy that Garcelle and Crystal kind of served her. And Andy said, two things can be true, which I'm a huge believer in that. And Andy said, I highlighted it, listen and say less, which needs to be Dorit's biography.
I
The
know.
listen and say less. So, Ryan, what were your thoughts about that?
Well, first off, Dorit, there's a pattern of behavior where she thinks she's serving, like, oh, look at me, I'm clapping back, and it usually then is so wildly off base. And she always does these in talking heads. She usually never does it to the person's face, and then it gets called out at the reunion. And I think that's something that's interesting too, is that she thinks she's serving, and in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, she's like, it's like somebody that, like, all of a sudden has superpowers but doesn't have an instruction manual on how to use them. She's like, I have this form and I'm going to do that. Oh, did I say the wrong thing again? Oh my God. And then she has to double down, triple down. Like, no, what I was trying to say was this. Like, oh, Priscilla Presley is also a child bride. That's a
Oh,
compliment. Like,
God.
no, come on. You were trying to be snarky. You were trying to get a clap
Right.
back. And it was kind of disgusting. It's
It
kind of
was
weird.
very
And
disgusting. It was
listen,
gross.
you can say that of a lot of people, but Crystal now in a 20-year relationship, with kids, a stable family, an actual business. It
And
is
husband who actually supports her, unlike PK. Sorry,
yeah, that's
Blue.
exactly it's like you also got to be aware of who you are saying that message. And if you're going to say a message where people could attack you immediately and point out examples of your own relationship, maybe it's not best to like keep digging under that rock. Like maybe
Mhm.
it's best to not do that because you think you're serving. And this is also an interesting thing when you come into these shows is how people respect their other castmates or they don't. Like that's why Sutton got picked on so much. And even Kyle, like these people think they really do. We do this in our everyday life of thinking you're above somebody else. Thinking you're like, God, you're, it's like you see even
Mhm.
Heather Gay, how she treats Whitney on Salt Lake. Like she doesn't
Ugh.
respect Whitney. She
Yeah.
does like, well, like, no, she feels so comfortable yelling at Whitney because she
Right.
doesn't respect Whitney at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And that's the same way with some of these, like Dorit at the end of the day doesn't respect Crystal. She might learn
No.
to respect Crystal, but she doesn't. And she can't pretend she pretends she does and she doesn't. And that's why she feels comfortable saying the things that she says. And I think that's the interesting thing is when you start to think you're better than somebody else, the universe is going to kind of show you exactly why that's not true.
I fully agree. I think that when people start to lose humility, that is when all hell breaks loose because like the universe is going to check your ass real quick.
Yeah.
That's life has a way of doing that. And I think that Dorit needs to heed that advice. Like if you are continuing to put your foot in your mouth, but you're not intending to, well, then you've got to look at that. And
Yeah,
you're the only
exactly.
person, right, who
Talk
can
about
be in
something to
charge of
look
that.
about. Yeah. And we've seen this season in, season out. And your heart does go out to Dorit sometimes because she can't seem to get past herself, which a lot of
Right.
us do, like I do that in my own life. Like I can relate
Sure.
to that. But at the
Sure.
same time, you have so much video evidence that at like some point, pay attention because you are being shown it right, left, and center. And at the end of the day, too, it doesn't help because, us, the audience, we point that out immediately. Like we are primed to like look at these behaviors and call out right and wrong immediately. And I think that's potentially frustrating for somebody like Dorit. And I think Dorit sometimes coasts on, well, we also gas them up, right? Oh, Dorit,
Oh,
like
yeah.
Dorit's a legend. Dorit's a legend. Oh
Queen.
my God, queen.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Slay.
We
Please.
gas them up, and then when
Yeah.
the other side of that, I think it must, being like sucker punch. They don't understand what's necessarily. I thought everybody loved me. I thought, wait a sec, I have Buva de
Right.
Beppo. What are you talking about? Like, and I think that can be
Right.
very confusing for somebody. Of like, well, did I do good or did I do bad? Did I do? I think it's interesting. The audience has a lot of
Yeah.
power.
It's a good point, and at someone who experiences on a microscopic level where, like, there will people who ride so hard for me, and then some people, like, out of the blue, there will be this nasty comment, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oof, what happened?" So, yes. But so being mindful of our time, the one last piece I want to get your feedback on was the biggest surprise for me as someone who has really had a problem with Anna Marie the whole season, I really felt for her. Like I saw her humanity. I saw the tears. I had no idea that her mom
Oh,
passed away.
Melissa, yes.
Right. And so, I wanted you to speak to that because as someone, you've had your own grief journey after your mom passed away. And I think that grief really does do a lot to our brains and a lot to us as people. And so I feel like it was interesting hearing that from her. It gave me a little bit less anger and a little bit more insight into maybe some of the stuff she was dealing with.
Yeah, it was so frustrating last night. Not frustrating. I mean, when she revealed that her mom had passed during the process of filming Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, but she
Mhm.
didn't want to make it about that. And once again, it's that same thing we were just talking about. Make it about that.
Right.
This is the forum to share. This is the
Right.
forum that we can relate to you, that we want to see your humanity. We want to help you get through this.
Right.
The audiences can be really cold, but we can also be really loving at the same time. And yes, that did, like, overall, still Anna Marie was doing a lot of other weird stuff on the reunion that I can't really, agree
Mhm.
with. But knowing that piece of information, it did make me think very differently in certain aspects of that, that's what you were dealing with. That's what you
Right.
were dealing with. And I just said, man, what a missed opportunity, not
I
only for
agree.
her, but for the show to be like, I would really like to talk about this. Like, and this is where you're going to show, like, man, as a producer, like, nobody thought to, like, Sutton can bring up Kyle's ring, but we can't bring
Yeah.
up How's Your Mom? Like, that is something. And like I said, I'm going through the same thing myself. And it's been 6 months since mom passed on this past Sunday. And
Yeah.
everybody has a story about
Sure.
somebody that we love that passed, a family member. And so I would have much rather seen Anna Marie talking about that than I ever in a million years would want her talking about anybody's esophagus, like anybody. Like I just
And
period.
I
Blank.
I felt I felt the same way, Ryan. It's like this could have been your arc. Instead, you chose violence and like
And
esophagate.
boring violence, like boring,
Well,
like it's boring. It made her look nutty.
Well, it
And
did, and you could tell here. You can tell, and here's the thing: I am trying to be mindful because we could talk about this forever. But I could tell at the reunion that she was embarrassed and ashamed of herself because she knew that she made herself look like an idiot, medically speaking, by going so hard against a real issue that she clearly heard the message about. Right. So, like, here's my frustration: is like her art could have been so different had she shared that real stuff, but instead we got this nonsense,
Yeah.
and it just made her look terrible. And she, I felt for her, but also at the same time, it's like these are the consequences of your actions. And sometimes we do need to feel appropriate shame and guilt, right? When we've spoken on things we shouldn't have or said things wrong or what have you. So, you know,
Yeah, just a wrong move on a reality show where you're supposed to be able to express reality. And I think as an audience member, your heart does go out, but it is frustrating that you're like, dude, you have this platform and this could have helped. I mean, I'm telling you, this would have helped her overall mental health in that
hmm
capacity because you would have had so many stories like I have gotten from other people about their grief experiences and
right.
realizing that you are not alone. And to then, cordon yourself off to an island by yourself, screaming about esophaguses, you know, it was very, that was a big revelation for me last night.
Yeah, misdirected grief is huge. And I think, for me that's what we saw here. Misdirected grief that and I agree with you. You sharing your story and, me sharing my stuff, it's like ultimately we do it right because it helps other people. So again, coming back to you and what you do, I think it's so important just because you're not just talking about Bravo, right? You're talking about real life and real stuff. And I think that's where the important
Well,
stuff is.
I'll push back on that a little bit just in the sense of I wasn't sharing that to help other people. I wasn't sharing about my mom. It was just this, my parents were a part of the podcast from the very beginning of the conception. I would have them on like on a weekly
Right.
basis, especially during the pandemic. They were like characters. And
Mhm.
it really made me love them in such a different way, or even being able to see them through other people's eyes really even kind of like impressed upon me what gold I had have with my parents, so
Mhm.
and then naturally once I had shared that, we did talk about her cancer journey. She did talk about it. There would be many times, and by the way, there were a lot of things that we didn't share that I wasn't able to share and won't be sharing.
Mhm.
And you know I've always not shared other aspects of things that I'm involved in my personal life because I want them for me. I want my own personal life. Like I want certain aspects of it to, but the mom thing was hard and
Mhm.
it still is obviously, but and it's
Of
something,
course.
but it's interesting because, people are so great and they'll, she'll message me about their own stories. And sometimes that's amazing. And sometimes that can be really hard to read, and
Yeah.
sometimes there's so many different things. There's no handbook for any of this.
No.
Yeah, but like I said, like last night, I was doing really good the last couple of days, and then last night I had the worst nightmare where it was, and I usually don't dream about my mom. I wish I dreamt about her. Like everyone's like, oh, she came
Mhm.
to me in a dream, and it was actually it was that I knew she was dying, and it was like something of like she was going to die in the next 3 days, and I had to watch her. I had to
Oh,
watch her die again. And she was fine in the dream, but we knew she was dying. And but all there's always one aspect of the dream that's completely batshit. Like, but we were at Disneyland. Like we were at Disneyland. Like I like don't know where that comes into it. Like we're at like and not just like we're at Disneyland Resort. Like we like got hotel rooms. Never stayed at Disneyland, but we're at hotel rooms in Disneyland Resort. And I'm just there. And I was sobbing in the dream. I was like, I
yeah.
can't do this. I can't watch this. I'm so sorry. And I think she said, I know you can't. And I was just, and I got to tell you, Melissa, like I woke up shook. Like I said, I was doing a breathing
Mhm.
exercise before this. I mean, I still like, it was so real. It was so, and the crying was so intense in the dream that
Yeah.
it really shook me because a lot of that I will not dream about her or I will
Mhm.
not. And if I did, I would prefer it to be a nice dream or some kind of message. And this was having to watch that again because we did watch it. We watched it, up
Yeah.
close in real life. And that was hard. Like, so you'll just have things out of the blue that, you know, you'll be going about business
Mhm.
and then something like that'll happen. And you're just like, holy shit. Like you'll just get shaky.
And, here's the thing, you're so self-deprecating, but I appreciate you sharing that because I think that even if it's not your intention to help other people, it just does. But more importantly, I'm grateful that you share it for you, because like you said, then you can get support from me and other folks. And but like what I want to say is that grief, I always say, it ebbs and flows like the waves of the ocean. And there will be times where you think you're in low tide and then you get bitch slapped by a
Oh,
wave.
that's what
And
people
you
tell me. Like they'll send me messages of like, it's 10 years since my dad passed and like I'm still dealing with it. And that's that there's something comforting in that. They're
Mhm,
never gone, even in grief. But there is something of like, oh, you're like, am I going to walk around for the remainder of my days with
right.
with that weight? But at the same time, you want that weight because you're honoring a very real person. So you want to wear that with some kind of like a badge of honor that this, Becky Bailey was here on this earth,
Yeah,
and she does deserve to have left a huge dent in me that I carry around.
that's right.
But it is hard then to, when it affects everything else or it kind of
Oh, of
flattens
course.
you.
Sure.
And but then just, that's why Anne-Marie should have shared these things, like we could have very real conversations about that. But yeah, like,
That's right.
unfortunately, I just don't, and I won't have any of the answers for any of this. Like,
Mhm.
well, the good thing of it is like, I don't really, there's not been tons of good things about this. I've watched,
Right.
my family is banded together, but we're splintered in a lot of ways,
Sure.
and I don't, we're very in communication every day. But I have to watch my dad go through this. I have to watch my sister go through this, and I don't, you guys all know you deal with this. Like it's not something. It's not the fun of Jackson Brittany splitting up. I'll tell you that. It's really it's no
No.
it's really it's very hard. It's harsh. It's gritty. It's gross,
And
and I
beautiful
think
all at
that's
the same time.
it can
Because
be.
to me, grief is the excruciating price of love.
Yeah.
And, and
What?
so there's please go ahead.
No, just I think it was like somebody. God, I forgot. I said it a long time ago. Is life only works. What is it? Life only works with memory or something. Life only works.
Mm,
It was just something about like if you do life right, you will be hurting about other people, which means you got close to people, which means you
right.
actually, and that's probably one of the things that we're here to do is to
Right.
form relationships with other humans and how they make you feel or grow or hurt you or love you or all of these things. I
Right.
think just in the very immediate is that you just miss the physicalness of that person, or
Mhm.
like I even miss dodging my mom's texts,
Sure.
like, come on, you got to answer me. Like, I miss that kind of stuff, like the stuff that's the thing. And she was such a
Yeah.
part of all of this. And she got such a kick out of the Vanderpump and the Summer
Mm.
House. And, it was such a way that we were connecting on. And she was so opinionated. And I'm bummed that, yeah, like sometimes you just don't feel tethered to the earth. And that's,
Sure.
that's it.
Well, when a part of your soul isn't here, right? You
Yeah,
don't
I
feel
found
tethered,
out this the other day. She's the one that had me. She was at. I was like, she created me, kind of like, no, it's no, it is that thing. You're just like, oh damn. And then there's, you think of like the bigger questions of afterlife, and like, oh, she's
Mm.
drinking the good wine up there. Like, really, we're allowed to drink in heaven? Like, is that? Like, are we set on that? Like, and are we allowed to watch the shows up there? Like, it like leads
Right.
to all these like larger conversations and thoughts that you can kind of go down a bad spiral with of,
Sure.
and like she was on the podcast like 65 or 66 episodes or something wild. And
Wow.
Sandra, who I work with, put all those episodes like, or the numbers of them. And I thought, oh, you know what? I'm going to do a Becky Bailey in memoriam episode. And I still have not been able to bring myself to listen to any of that.
Yeah.
And, there'll be a time and a place, but I think
Sure.
when it first happened, I was so under, God, even like, this all lasted like about 2 years, but I would say a year of what, like really intensely, I was so far from who I am as a person. Like I didn't lose because I was like being able to talk and be normal every day on the show, or somewhat normal. But
Mhm.
looking back, there was so much fear and so much sadness and so much insanity that I was going through. And yeah, it's really I've not really come to obviously to terms with a lot of this. And then, the passage of time goes so quick. And I was like, holy
Yeah.
shit, it's been 6 months already. Like, I thought it was just last month. Like, are you kidding me? Like, that's 6 months. And I was like, wow, I've just been sitting behind this mic for the last 6 months, and doing this. And I'm really proud of the show. But at the same time, I was just like, oh, damn. I don't know. It's really,
It's a lot.
yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. And, I just, in my practice, I feel that grief is one of those very painful, very difficult emotions. Well, it's not an emotion, it's an experience. And so, just my message to you, Ryan, is that I'm very proud of you for what that's worth, because I think that, dealing with my own cancer journey and, dealing with all the emotions from that, from your perspective, it's just so hard. And so my message to you, but also to people listening, is that all we can do is the best we can. And you are more than doing the best that you can. And, it's hard and you're going to struggle. And I'm just grateful for you to speak to all this, because it is so normal. It's so painful. It's hellaciously painful. I wouldn't wish grief on my worst enemy, but it is the excruciating price of love. And it's something that alters your life forever. Like, there's no, and sometimes I joke about the use of the word journey, because, I think that's kind of been co-opted in a lot of ways, but it
Yeah, yeah,
really
yeah.
is, it truly is like 6 months of a lifetime of grief. Like, I just say that so that you can be easy on yourself, right? Because that's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it's so hard and it's so painful. And I just, I'm proud of you. Thank you for
And
sharing
you all,
it.
but
And
you left out. You got to give yourself grace. That's another big Bravo buzzword. You got to give yourself
That's
grace.
true.
You got
Listen, I know.
it.
Heather Gay forever ruined that word for me, because I did love to talk about giving people grace, but now I just can't do it anymore. So,
Yeah, it is. It is interesting, the languages, but yeah, yeah. And also, like, just to the audience, is that I think the thing through all of this, and for you as well, Melissa, is that I've spent my whole life trying to be liked, wanting people to like me, and really wanting to please others way more than I've ever wanted to please myself, to my own detriment.
mhm,
Like, it's never made situations better. And I think sometimes you'll get into that thought of like, oh, I'm at a certain age, you can't change, and you're just locked into this. And why do I do these things? Or why do I want to be liked so badly and, please other people instead of pleasing myself? And I think, so, if anything, her death is kind of, people are going to like me or they don't like me. It's not
right.
something that I can control. And if you
That's
get
right.
something from it, great. If you don't, you don't. Um, my dad always said, he, still when he's on the podcast, he always finishes like, don't hate. And that's such a weird thing to say, especially in what we do, because it is so fueled on very intense feelings and a lot of
Mhm,
anger. But I mean, that's that kind of thing. If you can try to go through life, you're going to hurt people, obviously. But if we can try to, with each other, try to understand the behavior behind why somebody is doing what they're doing, some of that anger is going to dissipate naturally. And there
mhm,
also is a healing process, and time does, unfortunately or fortunately, heal some wounds.
mhm,
But that's the thing, too. I think that if anything, I'm waking up to the fact of I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to try to be good, and I'm
right.
going to fail a lot, and hopefully I can be a more whole person by the end of this year.
And what a beautiful way to end this, right? Because I feel like that takes us back to where we began, which is that the human experience, right? All we can do is just do the best we can. But it really does behoove us to focus on us, right? Instead of hurling out things on the internet about, projecting our anger and our grief and our rage and all these things, if we can turn it inward and we can focus about, okay, so how do I just get to a place where I'm good? I just think that, let's not forget there are people who will die never having achieved that thought or interest in like self growth and awareness and all these things. So I just think it's a gift that we can't we don't want to like minimize. So
Yeah.
Ryan, I just thank you so much. I could talk to you about this all day. And,
Yeah,
maybe
this was
listen,
great. Thank you for having me. I'll come back anytime, and you got to come back on my show. And I'm so proud
absolutely.
of all of your success. Congrats on the New York Times. Congrats. I'm very cheering you on from
Thank
afar.
you.
And I think it's excellent. And I'm just so happy to be here. And I hope this was okay for you guys, the audience out there listening. So thank you.
Well, Ryan, they'll let us know.
Oh, God. Don't let us know too much, you guys, please.
No, no,
Very
no. My audience is
fragile.
actually
Very,
really wonderful. They'll be wonderful. So before we end, Ryan, I'm just going to do my quick disclaimer, okay?
yeah, yeah.
Disclaimer, posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your RHOBH therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.